A little bit of a different approach to this one. I've actually seen a few movies over the past week. I'll start with The Suicide Squad, since that one was most recent. Then I'll be talking about Stillwater, Jungle Cruise, and The Green Knight, all of which I saw last week. Here are some time codes if you want to go skip to those parts of the video. So starting with The Suicide Squad, this one's actually a really fun movie. I'm very happy to say that. It's unclear as to whether this is a sequel or a complete reboot of the 2016 Suicide Squad movie, which is a steaming hot pile of shit. It uses some of the same characters. Some of them are main characters, some of them just have little cameos from the first movie. There's a lot of fun history behind this one. You know, like I was saying, the first movie's a total piece of garbage. It seems like Warner Brothers is trying to distance themselves from that one as much as possible, specifically by going and hiring James Gunn, who is right now very well known for the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. It does feel like a Guardians of the Galaxy movie if it was more violent, full of swearing, and just overall more cruel, but it was still a very fun time. I had as much fun watching something like this as I would have watching Guardians of the Galaxy. I like those two movies a little bit more than I like this one. There's a few things that I think that just has a leg up, but this is, I think, the best movie that I've seen in a theater in a very, very long time, mainly because the stuff that's been coming out isn't awesome anyway, but this is still a really enjoyable time. This is the best superhero movie, I think, since Endgame. This is by far the best DCEU movie, aka the only good one. This movie is absolutely bonkers and ridiculous, and it embraces it the whole time, which is exactly what you want for this kind of movie. The gore is super brutal, so is the violence. It's all over the place, and it's over the top to an unnecessary extent a lot of the time, but it's having a good time just sort of being this violent movie, and it's a very fun time to watch. You could tell they had a lot of fun making it, and because of that, it was a lot of fun watching it. Another thing that I liked about this one is this is a movie that recognizes its characters are evil and lets them do a lot of evil shit to prove it. They just kill birds randomly, they torture each other, they deny rats high fives. Overall, I'd give The Suicide Squad a 7 out of 10. I don't have too much to say about this other than it was a fun time. It's completely balls to the wall, batshit crazy, but it's still an enjoyable movie. I'd recommend going to see it if you're okay with a bunch of, like I said, very violent gore and over-the-top violence all over the place. If you're okay with that, then I think you can have a really fun time with this movie. Next movie I'll talk about is Stillwater. This is a movie from the director of Spotlight, starring Matt Damon. So there are a handful of good things about this movie, but overall I think that it does feel way too long due to some very severe pacing issues. There's a lot of great individual scenes and great moments between the characters, but unfortunately when you put them all together, you realize that this movie does have that big problem at keeping your attention from scene to scene rather than just within the individual moments. It seems to drag on a little bit more than I think that it intended. Part of this is admittedly a little bit of a plus because it is trying to add this more realistic element to the story where you have someone who sets out to accomplish their goal and they fail, so they just sort of live in the world for a little while and we just follow the characters around, and it's nice to get to know them, but it really became uninteresting after a while because I was thinking, okay, let's get this movie going. What this is about is it's Matt Damon and he's trying to free his daughter from prison. She was convicted of killing her roommate while studying abroad. This is very similar to, I want to say it's the Amanda Knox story, which this movie has received some criticism from her directly. I think that one thing that elevated this movie above a standard drama is its location in Marseille, France. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but that's okay. It just gave me something a little bit nicer to look at than what I'm used to, which is just traditional American scenery, whether that's in a small town America or Tom McCarthy's last movie, a bigger city like Boston and its surrounding suburban area. I think that it was nice to have that change of pace, and that was also assisting parts of the story because the whole point is that this character is experiencing an entirely new part of the world and is changing his worldview as he's going through this. Consensus on this one is that there's good moments, some pretty good performances. Matt Damon in particular I thought was actually very excellent in this, but overall it is very long and I think that it overstays its welcome by about 20 to 30 minutes. If you could trim it down in several places, I think that you could really have something a lot better here. I'd give Stillwater a 6 out of 10. Next up is Jungle Cruise. I'm a huge fan of the Jungle Cruise ride at Disneyland on which this movie is based. There's actually a scene very early on in the movie introducing The Rock's character where he does go on to give a jungle cruise of sorts, and I did not like this scene at all. It just felt like needless callbacks to the ride, and it wasn't delivered with nearly the same charisma as the cast members that are on the actual Jungle Cruise ride with you, and it felt very cheap, very cheesy, like it's just trying to cash in on the fact that you like this ride, and that's why you're here to see this movie, and I really didn't appreciate that as much. I didn't think that it was super funny. Kind of annoyed me, if I'm being completely honest. Along with most of the first half of this movie, I think that the first half was unfortunately really boring. I could not get on board with anything. It wasn't that it was particularly unpleasant in any one area except for that Jungle Cruise scene. It was just a little bit bland. There wasn't really anything for me to latch on to. Sure, Emily Blunt was charismatic as she was throughout the whole movie, and sure, Jesse Plemons was awesome. But other than those two, I really wasn't able to find myself enjoying it all that much. I actually dozed off a little bit, I'll admit. But by the second half, I really thought that the adventure kicked into full gear, and it was exciting, and it was fun, and it was actually exactly what I came to see. Just a fun, dumb adventure movie with logic that doesn't make any sense. I got some Uncharted vibes from it as well, with the random mystical elements that are being thrown in there, and the odd magical creatures that they end up encountering that are a part of the story. And it was all that kind of nonsensical fun. And that's exactly what I wanted to see out of the movie. So first half, really couldn't get on board. Second half, I was able to get on board and have a pretty good time. Two other quick things. There was this vibe throughout the whole movie that the entire thing was filmed on a set. Nothing really felt real. It looked like either a set or a green screen. Because of that, there was no real sense of danger or tension, which is why it was so hard for me to get into it in the first half. But I think by the second half, I must have just been more accepting of it or something, because I didn't mind as much by the time the movie finished. Another thing that I noticed is this terrible woke virtue signaling that can easily be cut for a foreign market. I'm talking about Emily Blunt's character has a brother in this movie who, in one scene and one scene only, they directly reference as being gay. Him and The Rock have a conversation about it. What I mean by this virtue signaling is that they just put this into the movie to score some brownie points. It's only the one scene, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the plot or the story, which means that in places like China or Russia, in markets that don't accept homosexuality, they can just cut it and still make all the money that they need to make from these. And I really don't enjoy when they do stuff like this. Rise of Skywalker had something very similar with that lesbian kiss near the end. It's just something that they shoehorn in to try and score some points domestically, but they don't actually care because they just cut it abroad. I really don't like it when they do stuff like that. So that was definitely minus a few points for this movie. Overall, I'd give Jungle Cruise 5 out of 10. First half was boring, second half wasn't, so bam, split the score right down the middle. Last movie I'm going to talk about is The Green Knight. I went and saw this movie and walked out of it very confused, mainly because I am dumb. This is a very metaphorical movie. There's nothing too straightforward about it other than the surface level plot, which is Dev Patel, I don't remember his character's name if I'm being completely honest, ends up accepting a challenge from the Green Knight, and the challenge is, if you strike me, then in 1 year you must come and find me and I will strike you the same. And so Dev Patel ends up beheading the character, and then he's like, whoa, never mind, I'm still alive. Now I'm going to behead you in 1 year. I can see where this is a very interesting type of story to tackle, and it was a somewhat interesting movie. I'd be lying if I were saying otherwise, but I couldn't get into it. It was shot and lit beautifully. It was wonderful to look at the entire time, but I couldn't get into the story of it all that much. I had a very hard time attaching myself to any one thing in particular, other than how nice it looked. It was, I thought, a little bit too slow for me to really enjoy it. I wish that everything had happened just a little bit quicker. The only really good part about the movie, I would say, is the beginning and the end. Everything in the middle was a little bit mediocre for me. I might feel differently on a second viewing, and I'm actually really hoping that I end up talking with somebody who enjoys this movie very much so that I can see what some of the positives are, because I know that there's a lot in here that I could have missed, but I really don't want to see it again is the problem. I don't know that I want to give it that chance, because the first time I watched it, it really just didn't do all that much for me. I left the theater not really being very impacted by it, other than the opening and the closing. I thought that those two scenes were really well done. The opening in particular, I liked the best. The closing left me with some interesting thoughts to walk away with, which I appreciated. But the problem is I just don't want to see the movie again, and I wish that I did. I think I'm just willing to accept that this wasn't a movie for me. And there's a huge disparity between the critics and audience scores, and I can easily see why. Like I said, very metaphorical. There's a lot of great technical aspects to this, but it was really difficult for me to get engaged in the story and what was actually going on screen. I'd give The Green Knight a 5 out of 10. And these are my thoughts on those 4 movies. I hope to be back soon with some more reviews for you. Take care.